Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our attendees from different time zones from all around the globe. Today, we have another roundtable edition of our Smart Cities and Connected Communities think tank. My name's Clint Vince, and I chair Denton's U.S. energy practice. And together with my teammate Emma Hand, we co-chair our 1,200 member global energy sector. Emma and I also co-chair this think tank. We have a really extraordinary panel today to discuss what I feel are some really breakthrough issues relating to hydrogen, and to give us a very good glimpse not only as to what's occurring in different regions around the world, but also what's likely to come over the next 12 to 18 months. Our first panelist is Gabriela Haas, who is based in Frankfurt. Gabriela has an extensive energy and regulatory practice, and she also is one of the leaders of Denton's Global Hydrogen Initiative. And we're going to start with Gabrielle, then I'll introduce our other panelists as we go along in sequence. And we will leave plenty of time for an interactive discussion with our audience. And you can just raise your questions as we go along in the Q&A feature. Better to use the Q&A than the chat, because I'll be monitoring the Q&A. So we are going to start with Gabrielle. And Gabrielle, Europe is way ahead of the United States, actually. Can you give us a snapshot on what's happening in Europe and what you anticipate occurring over the next year?
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Vince, for having me in this great audience. And a good day to all of you. And yes, I'm happy to give you a quick overview on what is happening in Europe and also in Germany. And when I prepared for this presentation, well, I did a little bit of a research, just by a simple Google research, and I will show you the results. Give me a sec. And that would be this one, hopefully, screen one. Yes, that would be the one. Can you see it?
It's coming in now, yes.
Yeah, okay. So what I did is I just basically Googled for some search words, and in order to see whether there is a trend upwards or downwards in regard to hydrogen. And as you can see it, when you look at the first table, it shows Germany. There was no possibility to choose Europe as a whole here, so I went for Germany, and I kind of compared it with the other jurisdictions, and they are all the major ones are all very similar. They look very similar to the picture you can see for Germany. And then I compared this picture with the one which you can see down there. It's about the US. It's just by search words. The search words were hydrogen, green hydrogen, and blue hydrogen. So the blue line, which you can see here, both for Germany and for the US, shows the term hydrogen. And you can see for the last 10 years, more or less, for around 8 years, nothing happened in Germany. So it's a little bit up and down, but it's basically more or less stable on a low level. As you can see in the US, it's a little bit, there are more ups and downs, but staying basically on the same level, when it comes to the interest into the term hydrogen. So when I then did a little bit of a deeper dive into the German picture, and that will also show you what happens in Europe, is I come to this picture. So yes, there is a hydrogen hype in Germany. There is a hydrogen hype in Europe. But if you look, have a deeper look into that picture, you see what drives these hypes. And that is also gives you an answer what may basically or potentially brings us a little bit of ahead of other markets. If you look at this picture, you basically can see that around June, July, there are two peaks. The first peak with where the search words went really up, is when the German government published its national strategy, its national hydrogen strategy. That happened in June. That is this big peak. Yeah. And the next peak in Germany, you can see in beginning of July. That is exactly when the European Union published its hydrogen strategy. Then everything went slow again. Yeah, and you can see the next hype at beginning of the year is that was the time when the when companies were asked kind of to make up their minds if they would like to go for funding. So this part is about regulation. The first two peaks is about, well, this is the strategy, the European and the German strategy. So basically setting the regulatory environment. And the second peak, smaller one, in fact, is the one about the money. And another interesting thing about these two slides is I also used the search terms green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. And I go back one picture. Probably you haven't seen it at all. Yeah. If we go to green and blue hydrogen, and we will talk about the colors in a second, you can't see anything, hardly anything at all. Yeah. So people are interested in hydrogen, but they're not so much interested in green or blue hydrogen. Well, I mean, it's a Google research, yeah, and it's probably not the best research one can do in the world, but it kind of gives you a picture about how the industry or how people look into these into the question of hydrogen and the green and the blue hydrogen. In regard to hydrogen, as I mentioned, so the Google search terms, basically don't make any difference between green and blue hydrogen. Green and how the colors are used in the European environment basically means hydrogen from renewable electricity, hydrogen based on the electrolyzing, and blue hydrogen meaning hydrogen from gas. So the one basically you can divide it by just by saying green hydrogen, that is without carbon, and blue hydrogen, well, that is gas based. Yeah, so that is how the colors are used in around Europe. So while the search terms on Google just show more or less the same results, it's very different how the European Union, the Commission, and also at least the German government looks at it. What you can see here on that chart is that the whole driver towards hydrogen is driven by the idea that Europe becomes the first climate neutral continent by 2015. In fact, Germany intends to become climate neutral by 2045. And in order to achieve all these targets, there are a lot of regulations underway, which you can see on the right-hand side of that picture, which has been published by the European Commission. And all these different regulations and frameworks shall actually count into driving the European Union towards climate neutrality. And one crucial part of that is actually hydrogen. And why is that? Because the European Union looks at it at different sectors. First of all, there's the sector of the energy consumption and energy generation. And according to the idea of the European Union, Hydrogen shall not play the biggest role when it comes to that, but here the European Union basically puts all eggs into the basket of electricity produced by wind or solar. And but nevertheless, the hydrogen share shall increase as part of the energy mix from 2% today up to 13 or 40% by 2050. So there is a slight increase intended, but not as big as you could imagine. The far bigger part, which is foreseen that hydrogen shall play, is actually to replace hydrogen or to replace fossil fuels in carbon-intensive industrial processes, steel, cement, chemical. And this last target is to give an incentive for beyond COVID recovery. As I mentioned, the second incentive, that is the money that which raised the second part. And here you can see the numbers. The numbers are the investments that are intended are 180 to 470 billion by 2015. And you can also see that the investment in low carbon fossil-based hydrogen shall only be up to 3 to 18 billion. So there is a big difference between blue and green when it comes to Germany and to Europe as well. So, and the idea is that this industry shall create a great number of jobs. What to do about it, and what is the European Union doing about it? Well, first of all, it's about the framework for decarbonization. And as all the governments think more or less think the same. Well, first of all, you need to have the regulatory regime. Well, how to transport, first of all, potentially if you go for blue hydrogen, the gas for the blue hydrogen, well, that in Europe is not an issue because the gas pipelines are there. Do we need to change gas pipelines into hydrogen pipelines? Yes, that is under discussion, and there will something potentially happen about that one. And the next question would be, do we need a separate regulatory regime for hydrogen pipelines? And the answer at least in Germany, is something, yes, something in between. First of all, there is the possibility to join a regulatory regime and to go for regulation, or the second possibility would also to allow certain feed into the gas pipelines. So this is on the transportation side. Then on the consumption side, the ideas go from certification of green hydrogen and potential biogenic incentives for biogenic hydrogen, which would be the orange hydrogen. That would be hydrogen made from feedstock and waste. Yeah? So the idea would be to give those sorts of hydrogen certain hydrogen as certificates and also certain incentives. Regulatory incentives, other kind of regulatory incentives would be, well, first of all, renewable targets, quotas potentially, and monetary incentives. And the last and most important point, and I think this will really be the driver for the future, is the contracts for difference. And so that is what the regulator is thinking about. There is already a framework for hydrogen or for certain elements of it on its way in Germany, and all other governments and Europe are also closing up. And just today, okay, it's not any longer the European Union, but it's just today, the UK has published its hydrogen strategy. And I had a very quick look into that one. And so it seems to be, and they call it low carbon hydrogen. And I think this is a little bit more towards the idea which, as I understand, you have in the United States.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. When we spoke recently, you mentioned that you felt that Europe was moving beyond the hype cycle toward actual development, and your chart would seem to reveal that. What's your forecast for the next year or so in Europe?
I think hydrogen will speed up again, and it will speed up significantly. but for other reasons. And the reasons are not so much because the regulator gives incentives or pays some money, but the incentives, oh, well, okay, in fact, it's also incentives. It's about the cost of carbon, carbon certificates. So if I go into these carbon intensive industries like steel, cement, and stuff like that, hydrogen is a solution for them. And that is the reason why they will be the driver for hydrogen in Europe, at least in the starting point. And as I can tell you, there are a lot of discussions going on. And one of the things is hydrogen cannot be produced, at least not for Germany, up to the level that is intended by the regulator and by the politicians. And one thing we are thinking about is, well, why don't we look to Africa, for example? Yeah. And so the idea would be Africa. I mean, you could produce renewable energy in Africa, like wind and solar for acceptable price. Yeah. And as soon as you actually solve the issue about transportation, which could be solved by ammonia, as we know, Africa, or the production of green hydrogen in Africa is actually something which is on the table and which raises a lot of interest. Another thing is basically is about blue hydrogen, but also the green hydrogen and corporations, especially with Africa, are on the table.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Wonderful presentation. Thank you for starting us out. We'll come back to you with a lightning round and also as we get more interactive with our audience. But just a great way to get us started. Our next speaker, Lex Heslin, is based in Manhattan. He's having some internet problems in his building in Manhattan today, so he's coming in with audio only. But Lex is a green infrastructure developer. He's a senior project developer with Hitachi Zosen Innova. It's a Switzerland-based affiliate of Hitachi, but Lex is located in the US. He started his career at Sanwa Bank in Tokyo. Then he perfected his project finance and infrastructure investment expertise at Goldman Sachs. Lex, tell us about what you expect to see in terms of development in both the United States and Japan, and then a little bit about your sister cities approach.
Sure. Hey, Clint, thank you so much for having me. And so sorry for the technology problem here at 7 World Trade Center. It's hard to believe that I'm having to do this on my phone rather than the internet, but we've had worse problems here before, so let's just roll with this.
And you're coming through very, very clearly, Lex.
Okay, super. So I'm sorry we won't be doing the visual presentation, but I love what Gabrielle had to say. That's a really great kind of tee up on Europe. The reality is Europe is streets ahead of the US, and but we're catching up quickly, and I'll talk about the market and what's happening in a minute. And, kind of in parallel with Europe, there is Japan, who really was one of the drivers of this thing and kicked the whole concept off of, moving towards a hydrogen society. And obviously Japan is completely import dependent for fuels, and so it makes a lot of sense from them as they seek to decarbonize. And their companies are working feverishly towards solutions. And as is often the case, Japanese companies reach out to U.S. companies. Interestingly, in the U.S., the story is all about California. As most people know, the East Coast kind of follows California when it comes to all things green. here in New York, we're maybe, kind of 3 to 5 years behind California when it comes to implementation of the regulatory infrastructure necessary to put, green energy in place. And so most of the activity has been in California so far, and we're very active in California. Quick pitch for we're Switzerland. We're the leader, global leader in waste to energy and anaerobic digestion. Our parent is Japan, and that's the Japanese link here. We've been in business for over 8 years. It's a publicly traded, several billion-dollar company in Japan with over 1,000 employees. Our link to hydrogen is really developing quickly, and I'll kind of segue of how we got to California. We're, the EFW business, also known as waste to energy or energy from waste or incineration, is very big in Japan, in Asia, and in Europe, much less so in the U.S. There is a huge waste problem out there, and one of the solutions we have for dealing with waste, particularly organic waste, is anaerobic digestion. And so for those of you who don't know AD, it's a pretty simple process where we take food waste and green waste and we put it through a fermentation process where we kind of cook that material down in an oxygen-free environment, and it releases biogas. And that biogas is about 56% methane. And we take that methane and we either clean it up and put it into the pipeline as renewable natural gas, or we take it and put it through SMR with CCS to generate clean hydrogen. And so Hitachi Zosen Inova is doing some really unique things in Europe on both the biogas to hydrogen connection, where we're going directly from biogas with SMR to hydrogen, but we're also involved on the electrolysis side, which is pure green hydrogen. We built the first industrial-sized power-to-gas facility, a 6-megawatt facility up in the north of Germany in Vertle, Japan, that uses curtailed power from a local wind farm there, and has 3 2-megawatt electrolyzers. We're doing a project right now with the Swiss government at a water location, a hydro site. So we generate hydroelectricity, and we go from DC to DC, from the DC generation of the hydro plant to the DC input at the electrolyzer, so there's no loss. And it's a super efficient kind of demonstration project we have that's creating hydrogen that will supply the 1,500 fuel cell electric medium-duty transportation trucks that are coming from Korea to Switzerland. And we're also doing a project with the Swiss government related to cycling of electrolyzers that's kind of trying to increase efficiency over the intermittency that comes from wind power. So we're involved in some different ways, both in hydrogen, both on the gas, biogas, the hydrogen space, as well as the electrolyzer space. AD is not anaerobic digestion is not a new technology to Europe. It's, we have plants there that have been in operation for 30 years. Most large European cities have one of our projects. We came to the U.S. And commissioned our first plant in San Luis Obispo, California, about 3 years ago. And we just built our second one down in Escondido, California, and I'm getting ready to start construction on a very large one in Lancaster, California, which is 70 miles north of Los Angeles. And for those of you who know the California market, environmental markets, it's very much driven by Senate Bill 1383, which requires diversion of organic waste from landfills. And those laws are that was passed in 2016. It goes into effect on January 1st, 2022. So cities and haulers and any waste generators need to find a place to put their organic waste and that's not in a landfill. And so we have the technology solution and are building these large plants to process that waste. You know, when I started, and by the way, our projects, they produce 4 things. Number 1 is gas. Number 2 is organic compost. That gas can be used to either run a CHP unit and generate electricity to sell back into the grid in California, which is considered green electricity, or it can be used to make renewable natural gas and just put into the pipeline, or we can make hydrogen from it. So it's, you know, we have some, we've had some real growth in California. Our first project went to electricity, where we would get a special tariff in California called the biomat tariff, which is 12.7 cents a kilowatt hour for up to 3 megawatts. And then our next project was biogas upgrading into renewable natural gas and put into the SoCalGas pipeline. And interestingly, the whole market for hydrogen is really taking off in California. They have the largest number of hydrogen passenger vehicles. The Class 8 market is just beginning to develop there. The state has put a ton of money into fueling stations. There are 3 or 4 players in the fueling station business. The retail fueling station, First Element, which is an American company that's partially owned by Mitsui and by Japan Bank for International Cooperation. They've got about a 60% market share. There's Iwatani, the large Japanese gas company. There's Shell. And then Toyota Tsusho, the trading company of Toyota, is also very involved. And of course, Toyota has their new Mirai car on the road, which is very attractive and is selling really well. So hydrogen downstream is starting to really get demand from the passenger vehicle side. That's, you know, very valuable in California, where they have the LCFS, or low carbon fuel standard credit. And our anaerobic digestion projects, which were primarily driven by renewable natural gas, we're starting to look at now for hydrogen, because it appears that there may be a better margin for us to convert our low carbon intensity biogas into renewable hydrogen. And so we're getting a lot of demand for that product. And I think as the California hydrogen market matures, certainly the transportation fuel market will have more and more demand, and the demand will be for lower carbon intensities. And so Gabrielle had talked about gray, blue, and green. Obviously, green hydrogen has the lowest carbon intensity. Any of the blue hydrogen needs to have CCS to capture that CO2 and do something with it to get a good carbon intensity score and a good value from that LCFS credit. And so I mentioned what we're doing in California, the very active market in California, and Japanese company investment there. You know, you've got players like Mitsubishi Power that are doing the Intermountain Power project, a really fabulous project in Utah, where they're converting a coal-fired power plant to a gas plant that will burn increasingly larger amounts of hydrogen and transport that electricity down to Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. That's a really interesting project because it happens to sit on a large underground salt mine where they can store, a couple of salt mines actually, where they can store both CO2 and hydrogen. And so, you know, that's a beautiful example of, you know, scaling this technology up. You know, most of the big Japanese companies are involved in hydrogen in some way. So California is really the driver for the U.S. It's coming here to New York. We're starting to get some interest in doing hydrogen. Hydrogen is actually not legal for cars in New York because of roads, because of tunnels and bridges. So we have a little bit of a ways to go there.
Whoops. I think we just lost Lex, so we'll come back to Lex when he's able to rejoin with his audio. And our cleanup hitter, on this panel is Melanie Kenderdine, very dear friend for many years. Melanie is a principal of the Energy Futures Initiative think tank, together with former Secretary of Energy, Dr. Ernest Moniz. She has held many senior positions at the Department of Energy. I think that Melanie still holds the record at DOE as the longest serving political appointee for her collective tenure there. Importantly, Melanie was the key architect of the quadrennial energy reviews that were conducted under Secretary Moniz's tenure. And prior to her service at DOE, Melanie was the executive director of the MIT Energy Initiative, which really had some pretty renowned industry studies of everything from natural gas, nuclear, coal industry to renewables. Melanie was also named a few years ago by the National Journal as one of the top 5 women shaping energy policy in the United States. And Melanie has a slide that I saw her present at Aspen Institute's Energy Week. I believe it will win the Slide of the Year award, Melanie. And why don't we let you use that slide to develop an overview of what the possibilities are in the United States.
Great, thank you so much, Clint. And it will take a minute for this slide to come up. You will see why in a second. There we go. And let me give a very, very brief background on how this came about. The Energy Futures Initiative did 2 studies in California. The first was a technology study, assumed California's climate goals, what technologies or suite of technologies did they need to meet them. For both industry and power generation, CCUS figured heavily into their meeting their 2030 goals. We then did a follow-on study, CCUS in California. And we looked at the Port of LA Long Beach, where CCUS and hydrogen figured very heavily into ways to decarbonize the Port of LA Long Beach. So that got me thinking about this, and this is what I do when I can't sleep at night, which is all the time, and I put this figure together. And what you are seeing here is an overlay of one map on top of another. The first are EIA's 10 electricity regions in the US. Washington, Oregon, California, they're in green. That's one of the regions. It's an overlay of those 10 regions on top of potential carbon sequestration sites in the US. And you see that coming up there. The red are oil and gas reservoirs, appropriate and valuable for storing, for underground storage. The beige is saline formations. You see up there, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota has a very large saline formation underneath it, et cetera, et cetera. And black unminable coal seams. And so what I have done, okay, is, and you'll see these in a second, these are for the electricity regions, the percentage of gas and coal generation in those regions. So mountain region where I am today, I'm in New Mexico. The lighting here, it's a little bit earlier than where you are, so it's showing up in my lighting. The 69% gas and coal generation, clearly that is not going to be replaced in the next 9 years for some 2030 targets. And so CCUS is an option for managing the emissions from that gas and coal generation. You go around the country, New England's only 50%. It does not have options for CCUS. You don't see any saline formations, oil and gas reservoirs underneath it. Going around the country, Then you get to West South Central. It is the highest gas and coal generation, 71%. Okay, I've also calculated the numbers of jobs associated with that as well. And then over here, California, Oregon, Washington, Pacific contiguous, they have the lowest gas and coal generation. That's all gas, because they have abundant hydro in that region, but the glaciers are melting, and that's largely glacier fed hydro. And as you have read, they're having enormous trouble with drought in that region, and it is affecting their ability to generate hydro. So I've had long-standing concerns, more focused on glacier fed hydro than on drought, but that's figuring heavily into what's going on these days. So what you see here, these are approximate locations. It was me looking at maps and counting and locating. I didn't use GIS mapping. Okay, we could do that in the future. But approximate locations of where, these are where your steel plants are. These are where your refineries are. This is the approximate number of gas processing units in the country. This is the approximate number of chemical processing facilities in the country. So Texas down there, there's 33 chemical processing facilities. This is where they all are. And what I would say about this is that when I looked at this, by and large, with the exception of cement, these are all either consumers or producers of hydrogen, or both. And so I started looking at this, and when you put them all on the map, it starts, this jumped out at me. You start seeing the formation of hydrogen CCUS hubs, okay, where there are appropriate storage locations for capturing and storing that hydrogen, the emissions from hydrogen and from cement, big emitter as well. Okay, but also, and I'll say a little bit about this in a second, enormous economic activity when you look at this. You see where you could do hydrogen CCUS hubs, but also what jumps out at me is the economic activity associated with all of that. And so looking at this, we won't go into this, I'm sorry. I mean, in the show, okay. When you look at that, what jumped out at me, with the exception of California and a couple of hubs in California and one in Seattle, most of those, the rest are all interstate. Okay, and when I showed this slide to our advisory board, EFI's advisory board, Charlie Curtis, former chair, called me afterwards, said, "This is the future." Okay, but there is no regulatory structure for hydrogen CCUS. You could start using Interstate Compact Commission authority to start forming up relationships between the states, and then focus on developing a regulatory structure that accommodates both the infrastructure you need for hydrogen as well as the infrastructure you need for CCUS. And right now, hydrogen is regulated as a specialty chemical, and it has basically safety regulations. It is not regulated for use as a fuel, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that in that figure that I showed you, it also enables certain other technologies. It enables, you can use it, those geologic formations for hydrogen as a storage medium, for example. You can use it for direct air capture. People like direct air capture until you tell them they have to sequester the carbon. So direct air capture, you can sequester, there are locations for sequestering the carbon. It enables compressed air energy storage. You need a hydrogen, and you need the same geologic formations for compressed air storage, and BECCS, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. So besides pointing to the potential for new market development. It also highlights opportunities to enable other technologies. And let me just say a couple more things. We have since had a workshop on the Ohio River Valley and the potential for blue hydrogen in the Ohio River Valley. I did some background analysis for that workshop. Hydrogen in the Ohio River Valley is used for chemicals, primary metals, fabricated metals, petroleum and coal products. It desulfurizes petroleum and coal products used for desulfurization, plastics and rubber products, food, beverage, and tobacco products, and paper manufacturing. And so those are all the uses of hydrogen. When I mentioned the enormous economic activity associated with what you saw there, that jumps out. And just iron and steel in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, the 3 states we looked at as the Ohio River Valley hub, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, the economic output in 1 year for those 3 states alone was $46 billion. The jobs associated with pulp and paper, major user of hydrogen, are 120,000 plus jobs in that region for pulp and paper. So we view hydrogen as an enabler of these. It is an enabler of an enormous economic activity. CCUS allows you to decarbonize from that industrial activity. At the same time, you are continuing to enable that activity. And I should have said one other thing. In the California study that we looked at, the California had in 1 year, these are data, not modeling, in 1 year had 90 days with little to no wind. It had 10 days in a row with little to no wind. Our conclusion from that, looking at that battery storage, everyone knows battery storage is 4 hours. Our conclusion from that is that you need a fuel. Right now, that fuel is natural gas. That fuel could very well be hydrogen, and so this hub concept could also enable that transition from natural gas to blue hydrogen, and then the infrastructure that you put in to enable those kinds of hubs could ultimately be used for the green hydrogen of the future. And so that's just a little bit about our thinking, the value of this. And I said if I would only say one other thing, I lied. I'm going to say one more thing, is that regions of the US will obviously decide if we elect to go forward and have a big hydrogen push, which I think we are there, whether they want green hydrogen or blue hydrogen. New England doesn't have an option. They don't have storage sites. It doesn't have a regional option for green hydrogen. The Mid-Atlantic, it's largely offshore storage opportunities. I think that's more problematic. They might very well look at green hydrogen as well. Other regions could very well choose blue hydrogen, and so it accommodates regional differences in the United States as well. So thank you, Clint.
Phenomenal presentation, Melanie. The last week there was a provocative study that came out, I think in collaboration from some professors at Cornell and Stanford. It was published in the New York Times regarding environmental concerns about blue hydrogen. Did you have a chance to look at that study at all? Do you have any reaction to it?
I think you must say that tongue in cheek, Clint, because I've been bombarded since the study came out a couple of days ago, and let me say a few things about it. It is, I think appropriately, and its biggest area of focus was methane leaks across the natural gas system from production to distribution, and methane leaks in this instance from natural gas that you would use to generate the power you need for CCUS. So I would start by saying, and I said this 3 years ago now in Katowice, Poland, to the industry, capture your methane emissions. The technologies exist to do that. Take that issue off the table. Okay, and so I was in the Obama administration. We issued a rulemaking on a rule on methane emissions capture from oil and gas systems. We did that right before we left. My office did the analysis on that, and so we released that rule. The Trump administration elected to not implement the rule. Okay, that was 4 years of lost emissions capture from oil and gas systems. And the huge value in that are early gains. Okay, because if you capture the methane and take it out of the system, has high radiative forcing, and we would have been much further along in the early gains we need, and the value of that had they not chosen to not implement the rule. It's my understanding that the Biden administration is going to re-implement that rule, maybe with some changes. I don't know. Okay, so start by saying capture your methane emissions. Having said that, okay, if they do that, a huge part of that analysis, the assumptions are that those methane emissions are not captured. The assumption is, and then I would say for all the assumptions that they made, and it was a peer-reviewed paper, so their assumptions are defensible, they picked and used the most conservative assumptions. The general rule of thumb is that methane emissions are 2.3% of total emissions from gas systems. The leaks are 2.3%. They used a 3.5%, just to illustrate the conservative nature of the emissions. They also changed the denominator for calculating global warming potential from the 100 years, that is the standard use. They changed that to 20 years. Okay, there's a lot of controversy over that, a lot of agitation over that. That is still, the standard is still 100 years, not 20 years. EPA has not changed how it's calculating these. It's still using the 100 years. I think that it deserves to be looked at, okay, but in a larger context. The residence of methane in the atmosphere is, even they say nine years. The typical understanding is 10 to 12 years. So the residence of methane in the atmosphere is very short. That's why you get early gains from capturing the methane, is because of the short residence in the atmosphere. But so 20 years is what they use. I would say on that, residence of carbon in the atmosphere is 1,000 years. We don't calculate that in our normalization either. That means carbon is compounding in the atmosphere. Its life in the atmosphere is 1,000 years. So again, they use very conservative estimates. They use a GWP, a denominator that is not universally accepted. Having said that, I do like the focus on supply chain emissions, the industry itself should capture those should stop the leaking along the supply chain. But I think that there are a whole lot of supply chain emissions that we need to be looking at. That is critical if we're going to get to net zero. Okay, and I'll give you one example before I shut up, Clint. The one example I would give on supply chain emissions, we've been doing some global analyses. International shipping supply chain emissions are roughly 3% of the total emissions in the world. They are captured and calculated in no one's NDCs. No country calculates a supply chain international shipping emissions in their nationally determined contributions. If we are going to move to net zero, and we need to, all of those emissions need to be calculated, not just supply chain emissions for natural gas systems. So I think that that's important. We need to do that. And I lied again. One other thing that one of their other assumptions is that natural gas power is used for the carbon capture systems. It's all natural gas, okay, and they don't consider nuclear, they don't consider renewables, et cetera, in their the electricity that is used to do the carbon capture. Okay, so I think that that's again the most conservative estimate. And they also say that carbon capture is, I don't know, 65% of total emissions. That could be a total emissions. It's only 65%. That's a very low number. There are instances of much higher capture percentages than they assume. And for example, the Allen cycle that Net Power has developed is 100% capture. And so again, incredibly conservative estimates for every assumption that they make, which, you know, that's what they chose to do. And I use conservative in a collegial way. Okay, but I would also say they're worst case, and there are many instances where those are low estimates and no attempt to do mean estimates, et cetera. So, but capture the emissions on the supply chain, hugely important, and we should be doing it. So.
Thank you, Melanie. By the way, our law firm represents Net Power. We're a big believer in technology and the Allen process. I think that will be a breakthrough technology. But thank you for really making those points with respect to the recent study. I think it'll be the centerpiece of a debate that we'll be experiencing for the next several years. And I think that you've just framed some of the key issues beautifully.
Well, thank you. Clint, if I could say one thing, that it is typical, making the perfect the enemy of the good. We will spend energy and time debating this issue rather than going out and capturing the emissions and doing carbon capture and sequestration and hydrogen. Okay, it's typical. And we don't need the delay that it creates. Okay, that's my, sorry. Thank you. All right.
Thanks, Melanie. I'm not sure. I think we may have lost our connection with Lex again. Is Lex with us? I did have one follow-up question. No. Well, let's do this. I'd like.
He's out there, Clint.
Hi, Clint.
Oh,
I'm
good.
with you, Clint.
Great.
Yeah.
Listen, Lex, I'd like to save plenty of time for Q&A. I want to remind the members of the audience to put your questions into the Q&A feature on your screen. I won't have time to simultaneously check the chat room, so just go with Q&A. We've got a couple of great questions lined up already. But Lex, I wonder if you could just take maybe 2 or 3 minutes before we do that and just describe, I know that Lancaster, California has a 10-year master plan regarding hydrogen. Can you just really quickly give us an overview of that?
Sure, you bet. It's so we developed a 10-year hydrogen master plan for them because they were basically starting from scratch. And, you know, this is a city, a desert city that had a lot of social problems, and a strong mayor came in and decided to really change that city around, Rex Paris, and that was about 10 years ago. And, you know, I was a solar developer back then, and we came in, and he was one of those mayors who said, look, we'd love to have your business. We'll help you get permitted instead of fighting with you. And so we went there and built solar. And actually, over these 10 years or so, the city committed to becoming a net zero city. It's the first city in the U.S. to achieve that. They developed their own kind of local utility company called a CCA, a community choice aggregator, Lancaster Choice Energy. So they sell their own green energy to their own people, and they, you know, turn a very tidy profit that goes back to the city every year. And they've brought in about $2 billion in solar investment. And so, you know, fast forward a decade, Hitachi Zosen comes back. We're building a plant, a AD plant in Lancaster, and hydrogen is the new fuel instead of solar. And so the mayor wanted to, you know, get Lancaster on the map in terms of solar, in terms of hydrogen. And when I say get it on the map, I mean in terms of not only generating hydrogen, but being involved in the transmission and the distribution and the storage, and encouraging hydrogen companies to come invest in Lancaster and see that, you know, they were committed to a hydrogen future. So what we did is we sat down, we developed a 10-year master plan for them, and it's divided up into 4 phases. The first phase is a green energy microgrid, and this kind of goes from small to big. The first phase is a green energy microgrid that powers the city hall and that backs up city hall for PSPS events and for outages and for fueling the hydrogen fleet that the city is developing. And that's kind of a commercial pilot project with a few Japanese companies, and that's happening over the next 18 months. From there, the program goes to an expansion of that green energy microgrid to the hospital, to an advanced energy residential community, and to the local transport authority as they integrate more into hydrogen. From there, in kind of phase 3, which is say years 3 to 5 of this plan, the hydrogen distribution infrastructure begins to expand and support a maturing hydrogen market within Lancaster and the neighboring city, Palmdale. And so by this point, hydrogen has become more of a mainstream fuel. Cars are on the road, trucks are using it, and so forth. And in the last phase of the master plan, hydrogen production really reaches kind of utility scale, and the cities begin to profit from being involved in public-private partnerships, with, you know, where hydrogen is actually sent beyond their urban boundaries, and that comes from their involvement in the storage and distribution side of the business. So it's a nice, I think, very achievable 10-year master plan for what we call a tier 2 city to become, you know, to kind of transition towards hydrogen. Because of the Japanese involvement, the Japanese government has been very helpful in pairing the city of Lancaster with a city in Japan called Namie, which is in Fukushima. So all of you remember the big tragedy, the tsunami, earthquake, and nuclear meltdown on March 3/11 in Fukushima. You know, hard to believe that's already been 10 years, but long story short, one of the cities there on the coast was kind of really wiped off the face of the map, and the Japanese government has been rebuilding that city, Namie, as the first hydrogen city in Japan. And, you know, they've invested a lot of money and put a consortium of Japanese companies together, and they built the largest solar to electrolyzer field in the world that was christened about a year ago. And so, long story short, we've put together Lancaster and Namie in a new program that we call Smart Sister Cities. And what it is a municipal pairing for cities that want to move into hydrogen. And it's kind of like the old bricks and mortar Sister Cities program combined with some smart city technology and a real focus on hydrogen. In fact, we just worked with Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry and JETRO to conclude that agreement. And so Namie and Lancaster are the founding partners of Smart Sister Cities. And we're going to be reaching out and looking for other cities around the world that are interested in pairing with them and following their own hydrogen roadmap and sharing information and best practices and information on companies and technologies that are coming to them. It's a real great kind of economic development tool for these cities, and it's really particularly for tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Los Angeles and New York don't really need that much help. This is for smaller cities to kind of get together and support each other in this transition to hydrogen. The program has just started. If there's anyone listening who'd be interested in maybe a city that they work with joining our network of Smart Sister Cities, we'd love to hear from you and get my information from Clint. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lex. And we will be following this issue with our Smart Cities think tank and looking forward to the development of it. Let me just ask each of our panelists to do one lightning round, 60 seconds or less, just a couple of sentences as to the most important point you would like to convey to our audience today. And then we've got some really great questions lined up. I'd like to get into those and have us get into a more interactive discussion. Gabrielle, let me start with you. And what thoughts do you want to leave us with today?
Yeah, I think what I would like to leave you with is what I like about your way forward is that you don't concentrate solely on green hydrogen, but are technology open and are also thinking about carbon capture and all these things, because that is the way how to make it happen in the end, because you cannot always only look at the far-reaching aim. You must have that in mind, but consider the way to it. And I think you are just on the right way as I listen to you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Such good advice. Whenever we don't try to pick technologies, but leave that open, we get the best technological development and the best outcomes. Terrific advice. Let me call on Lex next and then Melanie.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, I'm personally committed to hydrogen as a route to global decarbonization. It's really a fantastic solution. We didn't get into this, but the reality is that, there's a long way to go to advance this fuel carrier. And I think what we're going to see pretty quickly is utility scale hydrogen generation, whether it's blue or green, ramping up into ammonia for global shipping to places like Japan and Korea that are resource starved. Ammonia is a fabulous way to transport that fuel that's at room temperature and not pressurized. And the quicker that we can decarbonize and move towards these green fuels, whether it's blue or green hydrogen, the quicker that we're going to start tackling the climate issue. I would encourage everyone to keep their minds open to all of the new technologies. There are, electrolyzer prices are going to come way down real quickly. This is absolutely going to follow exactly what happened with solar. But there are other, biogenic technologies and so forth that will come for hydrogen and for advanced carriers of hydrogen. We talk about ammonia, there's also kind of a solid state solution. You know, if you can imagine a situation where we can get hydrogen onto some medium, like a thin film or something where it's a solid and it can be at room temperature, then we'll be able to transport and use it very, very easily. So, you know, we're just at the tip of the iceberg with hydrogen. It's very exciting. Let's keep our minds open. Let's keep our markets open, and let's push this business forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Lex. I'm glad you were able to reconnect because you have provided a wealth of information today. Melanie, do you want to wrap up this phase of our panel, and then we will start with questions?
I'm gonna make two quick points. One is about infrastructure. And one of the things that I have looked into is can I at some point reuse CO2 pipelines for hydrogen pipelines, assuming that we are going to move to a green hydrogen future at some point? And the answer is yes. I talked to the AFL-CIO pipeline experts. You need special treatment, okay, because hydrogen embrittles pipelines. So you need some special treatment going into it. I think we should be providing those incentives, okay, to make CO2 pipelines better than we might otherwise, so that ultimately you would have an infrastructure for a green hydrogen future. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is, and I started a little bit about this, is that I think it's very important that we think about this carefully. We are starting to look at global markets in hydrogen, shipping hydrogen, et cetera, moving it long distances. There is, right now, hydrogen is priced as a feedstock and a specialty chemical. I really think that we need to start thinking about how the world market, global markets price hydrogen as a energy commodity. There is no pricing mechanism for that. I think we have WTI, we have Henry Hub for oil and gas. We need to think about global market pricing structures for hydrogen, and we'll be looking at that in the near future. So thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Two great points. Here we go with questions. First question is from our colleague Adam Brown in our London office. Question from a non-US lawyer. How much of a drag on the development of clusters is the lack of appropriate regulation of hydrogen? How far could you get by just adapting contractual models from upstream, midstream oil and gas when the focus is on heavy industrial consumers?
I guess I'm the one that, I don't know. Gabrielle, unless you want to comment on U.S. market.
I'm not a U.S. lawyer.
I haven't looked at the specific value of existing contracts, okay, to start forming up those markets. I think that that's already happening, okay. Those contracts exist, but I am thinking about the future and the need to materially and rapidly decarbonize. And so it's why we are looking at these regional hubs. It's why we're looking at Interstate Compact Commission Authority. There are examples that already exist for environmental reasons. And so we have examples where we can start moving forward on that. I do think that we need a central regulator for a federal regulation of hydrogen as an energy commodity in concert with CCS, and I would look to FERC for that. That is the logical conclusion to me, is that FERC is the right place to go to start looking at those issues and how you merge regulation of those two markets. CO2 pipelines are regulated by the Transportation Department in the United States. Hydrogen's all about safety, and we need to look at it holistically. We need to do it fast. Okay, and I think in the interim, we've got to rely on things like existing contracts. But climate policies are going to drive that too. So anyway.
Thank you.
I mean, not being a US lawyer, but Adam, I would assume as a starting point, I would take a traditional long or short term gas contract and just have a look at it and adapt it. But I mean,
good advice.
Potentially with some certificates of origination, depending on what color you would like to have or whatever it is. But yeah.
Thank
Obviously
you.
not a US lawyer.
Thank you, Gabrielle. And by the way, Melanie mentioned FERC, which in the United States is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has jurisdiction over all interstate energy commerce, basically. And Adam does not ask superficial questions, so we will keep his question front of mind as we go forward. We have a question from Joanna. Do you have any view regarding turquoise hydrogen development made from methane, pyrolysis, carbon byproduct is in a solid form rather than CO2? As a result, there's no requirement for CCS, and the carbon can be used in other applications such as soil improver or manufacturing of tires.
Anyone else in our group? Go ahead, Gabrielle.
I mean, I know that this is under debate, especially, and I know about some projects about that one. Yeah. So if you look at it from the perspective, if you can use that technology into going into a circular, yeah, industry or circular, well, it's about, I mean, you can, by parts, you can use waste for this kind of technology. Yeah. So, and for that reason, it might be an interesting one, but at least for Europe, I can say it's not in the focus. They concentrate on green and blue and potentially on orange one, yeah, from time to time.
I would say that in the focus on utilization of carbon is a hugely important focus as we move forward. It is very expensive and is in the development phase on the innovation supply chain. So I think it obviously deserves innovation investment of federal and industry dollars, but it's expensive. I'm worried about costs. I'm worried about urgency, and so obviously it's something that we should continue to put innovation dollars into. But it is a longer term option. I'm concerned about tomorrow and the next 10 years. And I'd say one other thing on that and somebody mentioned the very rapid decline in solar generation prices and the expectation that electrolysis will have similar rapid declines. And I am reminded, and as you said, Clint, I've worked at Department of Energy for many years. When the Department of Energy was formed in 1978, in its organic statutes, solar energy investment was one of the major focus areas of the Department of Energy in 1978. This did not happen overnight. these technologies, there's long-term, again, solar, we started investing in solar R&D in 1978. Once you reach a tipping point, you see very much more rapid declines and diffusion into the marketplace, which also takes time. But there's no, I hear the same thing about shale gas. Shale gas happened in 2008 and just went crazy. DOE, one of the first things in its organic statutes and in its first investments was characterizing shale basins in 1978. All of these technologies take time. Carbon utilization is much further along than shale gas basin characterization was in 1978 or solar was in 1978. It's much further along, but it is only at a certain point in the innovation chain, and it'll take some years to make that make it cost effective and diffused in the marketplace. So.
Thank you, Melanie. We have our closeout question from Philippe Coulard. Great question. I'd like to hear the panelists' view on the role of hydrogen in transportation. It seems to be narrowing to fleet delivery vehicles and heavy transportation. The passenger car market seems to have been well captured by lithium-ion batteries. Who would like to comment on that?
Gabrielle.
You can start.
Okay.
But I've got a few on that one.
Yeah, from a policy perspective, certainly with the what is included in the infrastructure bill and the focus on investing in battery charging stations across the country, huge focus on that. Many states, California as an example, has a target of 5 million EVs by 2030. By and large, from a policy perspective, it seems to me that we have already made a down select choice to electric vehicles on the passenger vehicle side. And you can agree with it or disagree with it. That seems to be the policy direction of both the federal government and of many state policies. So I do think that we do not have electric options for heavy duty vehicles, and I think that focusing on those is worth a significant amount of time, and that hydrogen provides a very good option that we should be looking at for that purpose. So,
Yeah.
Thank you, Melanie. Gabrielle?
Yeah, for Europe, I can say, or let's not take Europe in this one here. So let's look at Germany for that one, because I mean, there's the car industry in Germany, which is kind of, yeah, it's a huge industry, as you know, in Germany. So, I mean, if you just look at the car industry in Germany, you can just see that, I mean, the majority of the car industry just decided to go for, or just to put the efforts into electric vehicles. Yeah. But not all of them. Yeah. So there are, and just a couple of days ago, BMW published, well, it's a strategy on hydrogen, yeah, for cars, for vehicles, for not just heavy trucks, but really for the transportation, for the normal transportation. So yes, the market seemed to be decided, yeah, and certainly the policymakers are all on e-mobility. But I think there is a slight chance that over the time, apart from heavy vehicles and heavy transportation, where hydrogen seems to have a role for all, yeah, that hydrogen is not completely out of the game for the other ways of transportation. And there's one part which is actually quite interesting, and this is a public transportation. Yeah, and because in regard to public transportation, and you talked in the beginning about the smart cities. Yeah. And one issue where you've got where there are really interesting ideas on the way is, why can't you produce, or why can we not produce locally hydrogen from, for example, biogenic waste, yeah, stuff like that, and use that kind of hydrogen for local transportation, for public transportation, for buses like that. And I know that there are some concepts underway. Various cities looked into that, yeah. And on a local level, yeah, by avoiding hydrogen, the transportation of hydrogen, and really looking for local solutions, that seems to be a reasonable way to go. And it's something, and I mean, it's about waste. So you can use that into going into a circular economy by doing that kind of hydrogen production and local transportation.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Great comments. Lex, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with Gabrielle further about generating hydrogen locally, using it for public transportation. You know, a very challenging position now, because the U.S. government is, you know, 5 or 10 years behind on the hydrogen issue, and they really just caught up to electrification. And so that's what all the legislation points to: electric vehicles, this and that. And, you know, it doesn't, and we're talking about battery electric vehicles rather than fuel cell electric vehicles, because of course, you know, fuel cells are electric vehicles as well. However, we've got to figure out how to pivot and not get stuck on pure battery electric vehicles, because the reality is they don't work that great for heavy duty use. I mean, like in the waste business, for example, if you look at a garbage truck, you got an engine on the front and almost a separate engine to drive the hydraulics on the back. So it's a very heavy load on the engines. And batteries, the electrons that you can store in a battery are just not sufficient to drive those and give the truck range. And so, you know, if you have hydrogen on board that you can, that gives you a lot more range and that you can fill up in 4 or 5 minutes instead of a few hours, all of a sudden you have a great solution for hydrogen powered waste trucks. It's exactly the same for Class 8 trucks. You know, if you want a long haul truck that's going to carry a heavy load from LA to New York, there's no way you're going to be able to pull a battery big enough to move you across the country. And the other thing is the batteries are lithium ion technology. They're made from, you know, natural resources that we don't necessarily have in the U.S. That's mostly controlled by China. And, you know, at the end of life, you have a battery that needs to be recycled and may not be recyclable. So moving everything to electric vehicles is in effect creating another environmental nightmare for the future. A fuel cell electric vehicle has a much smaller battery and really relies on using, you know, tanks full of gas or liquids. So that is the solution for long haul, also for shipping and for air transportation. And so, you know, I predict that we're going to see trucks coming online pretty soon in the U.S. that'll do long haul, and that will be moving, you know, cleaning up the shipping industry in not too long. And, you know, aircraft is going to take longer because the technology is certainly applicable, but it's not robust enough for long, you know, international travel. But even there, you know, hydrogen has a very promising future. So I think, you know, battery electric vehicles are great for short haul and passenger vehicles, but we'd really be doing ourselves a disservice in the U.S. to not give hydrogen its place at the table to help, you know, reindustrialize this economy and to help move, you know, move things across the country and satisfy heavy duty uses. So I'm very positive to, you know, continue working with our elected officials to understand hydrogen better, and to understand how it works with electric vehicles and that they can work together, and not to go completely towards EV.
If I could say, I was not making a value judgment on the policy of the U.S. Of the federal government on EVs. That is basically where the policies are taking us, is electrification of passenger vehicles. I totally agree on heavy duty vehicles that there is and should be a significant role for hydrogen. I would say two things on the passenger vehicle side. We are electrifying our personal vehicle system. Okay, you saw problems in Texas with the blackouts, and people couldn't drive their cars because they couldn't charge them. It creates a different kind of concern we need to be worried about. As we electrify our light duty vehicle system, we need to be worried about the implications of that from an energy security perspective. And one other thing, I worry about rural America, where every little town in rural America has an auto repair store. What does moving to EVs, and that's a major source of commerce in these small towns, how can we address that issue? And as we move to electric passenger vehicles and ensure the ongoing robustness of the economies in these small towns. So,
Excellent points to close us out. It's a good thing we're at the top of the hour, Melanie, because you were just about to get me started on the massive market failure in Texas. And
yeah,
that's
that's for another
entire
day. Yeah.
webinar going forward.
Right.
Let me just say, Gabrielle and Lex and Melanie, that we made a pretty bold statement at the beginning of this webinar that you were going to present a lot of breakthrough ideas, and you certainly did not disappoint. In fact, you really exceeded my expectations, which were very high, and you just did a splendid job today. So I want to, on behalf of the audience that can't cheer or clap, I want to give you an ovation. Thank you. And we really look forward to hearing from you again on this important subject in the future. Let me just wish everyone a great remainder of the day. Bye now.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Bye-bye.
Have a good
Thanks
day.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Clint. That was very nice. Thank you.